Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into happiness?
Sounds like a plan I'm in.
We're tackling Brené Brown today, and you might know her from that super popular TED Talk.
You mean the power of vulnerability?
Yeah, exactly. But this deep dive goes way deeper. I mean, I just went through a ton of her work.
Hmm.
And the thing that surprised me most, it wasn't about like reaching some perfect bliss.
No.
It's more about how she connects happiness to, well, to embracing imperfection, which honestly got me thinking about self-compassion and setting boundaries in a whole new way.
Yeah, Brown's approach is fascinating. It's not about being happy 24/7, more like building a foundation for a fulfilling life, a foundation that can handle the tough stuff.
Right, like when things get messy.
Exactly.
And speaking of things that seem counterintuitive, vulnerability is a big part of that foundation.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, doesn't that seem kind of strange? You wouldn't think opening yourself up would lead to happiness.
You'd think it'd be the opposite.
Right.
Well, that's what makes her research so groundbreaking. She's been studying this for decades,
Mm.
and she's found that vulnerability isn't weakness at all. It's actually the starting point for joy, creativity, and those deep connections we all crave.
Okay, so now I'm starting to get it.
Mm.
Think about a time you shared something really personal with someone, maybe like a fear or a dream you had. I bet even though it was scary to open up, it actually brought you closer to that person.
Exactly. It's like that act of sharing, letting someone really see you. That's where the magic happens.
Mm.
Brown calls this authenticity, letting go of the pressure to be perfect, and just showing up as you are, flaws and all.
It's like progress, not perfection, right?
Absolutely.
But Brown doesn't stop at just accepting your flaws. She talks about wholehearted living, which sounds like a total lifestyle change.
In a way, it is. It's like
Sure.
living with intention, bringing your whole self to everything you do. And that includes cultivating gratitude, practicing self-compassion, and yeah, setting boundaries.
Okay, boundaries. I gotta admit, I used to think boundaries were selfish, like I was shutting people out.
That's a common one.
But Brown sees them totally differently.
Think about it this way. When you're always saying yes to everything and everyone, you're spreading yourself way too thin and neglecting your own needs in the process. So setting boundaries is about honoring yourself, protecting your energy, making space for what really matters.
So it's less about shutting people out and more about creating healthy space in your life for yourself and the things that you value.
Exactly. And this could be tough, especially
Yeah.
nowadays where we're always connected, always expected to be on. But Brown's research is clear. Setting boundaries is a key ingredient for happiness.
This is starting to click for me. So instead of chasing some elusive idea of happiness, Brown suggests we build a foundation of inner resilience and strong connections. It's about embracing the messiness, the imperfect reality of life, and finding joy in the whole journey, not just the destination.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole idea of embracing imperfection, it really challenges how we usually think about happiness. It's not about just avoiding the hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
Life's going to throw curveballs no matter what.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brown's really clear about that. A wholehearted life. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's about having the inner strength to deal with challenges, like heartbreaks and loss, without totally falling apart.
So maybe it's less about what happens to us and more about how we react to it. Like instead of beating ourselves up over a mistake, we try to approach it with self-compassion.
You got it. Brown's research shows that self-compassion is super important for building resilience and for finding that inner peace. That leads to lasting happiness.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? Self-compassion, I mean. Does it mean just letting ourselves off the hook?
Not at all. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a close friend. Imagine your friend's going through a tough time. You wouldn't put them down right.
No way.
You'd be there to support them and encourage them.
Mm.
Self-compassion is about giving ourselves that same grace.
So it's about recognizing we're human, that we're going to mess up sometimes. And that's okay. We can learn from it
No,
and move on.
exactly. And Brown actually has this great exercise for building self-compassion. It's called writing a self-compassionate letter.
A letter. Tell me more.
It's super simple, but really effective. You basically write a letter to yourself, but you do it from the perspective of a wise, compassionate friend. Think about what that friend would say to you, about whatever you're struggling with, like what kind of comfort and encouragement would they offer. Writing that letter can really help. It can shift your perspective and create a feeling of inner peace.
That's a cool idea. I'm definitely going to try that. But I have to admit, this whole vulnerability thing, it still kind of trips me up sometimes. It feels risky to put yourself out there, to let people see your true feelings, especially if you've been hurt before.
I totally get it. Vulnerability can be scary,
Mm.
especially if we've experienced rejection or betrayal. It's like
Yeah.
there's this part of us that's saying, hey, remember what happened last time? Maybe it's better to just keep this to yourself.
Exactly. So how do we get past that fear? Is it really worth the risk?
Here's the thing. Brown's research shows that vulnerability is the foundation for real connection and intimacy. Think about it. When we share something vulnerable with someone, we're basically saying, I trust you with this part of me. And when that trust is reciprocated, it creates a bond that's so much deeper than any surface level interaction.
It's like when you confide in a friend about something you're struggling with, and they respond with empathy and understanding. It instantly strengthens the bond between you.
Exactly. And Brown's found that these moments of vulnerability, they actually make us more resilient, not less. It seems counterintuitive, but the research backs it up.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm also thinking about the people in our lives who maybe aren't as receptive to vulnerability. What about those relationships where sharing our true selves feels risky or even dangerous?
That's a crucial point, and that's where Brown's emphasis on setting boundaries comes in. It's about protecting yourself, honoring your own needs and values, and making sure your interactions with others are mutually respectful and supportive.
So boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're also about protecting ourselves from people who might not be ready to receive our vulnerability.
Absolutely. Boundaries are a way of saying, this is what I'm comfortable with, and this is what I'm not. They help us create healthy space in our relationships and avoid situations where we might feel drained or disrespected.
And setting boundaries. I imagine that can be especially challenging in relationships with family or close friends who haven't always been supportive of our true selves.
It can be really tough, no doubt. But setting boundaries, it's ultimately an act of self-love and self-respect. Sometimes it's the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for the relationship.
So it's about creating a healthy space for both people to show up authentically, even if that means having difficult conversations or setting limits.
Exactly. It's about defining what's acceptable and unacceptable in our relationship so we can create a more positive and supportive dynamic.
This all ties back to authenticity, right? If we're always trying to please others or hide our true selves, it's going to be almost impossible to build genuine connections.
You got it. Authenticity is about showing up as our true selves, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. And that takes real courage.
It's like we're reclaiming our right to be who we are, imperfections and all. So it sounds like Brown's work is about creating a life that's aligned with our values, our needs, and our true selves.
That's beautifully said. It's about letting go of needing external validation and instead cultivating a deep sense of inner peace and connection. That comes from living authentically and embracing our true selves.
And it's a journey that requires courage, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace the messiness of life. It's not always easy, but it's definitely worth it.
It really is. And, what's so inspiring about Brown's work is that it reminds us happiness is an inside job. It's not about reaching some perfect state or waiting for things to change around us. It's about cultivating these qualities within ourselves and in our relationships.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm already shifting my perspective on happiness. Like it's less about chasing some feeling and more about nurturing those deeper qualities within myself and my connections with others. But I bet some listeners might be thinking, okay, this is great, but where do I even start?
That's a great point. I think
Yeah.
Brown would say, start with self-compassion. Notice that inner critic the voice that says you're not good enough or that you need to be perfect, and then try talking to yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend.
So recognizing those negative thoughts and choosing a more compassionate approach. Like, hey, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes.
Exactly. It's a practice. It takes time. But even small moments of self-compassion can make a huge difference. And you know what? When we're kinder to ourselves, we're more likely to show up authentically in our relationships too.
It's like a ripple effect. Self-compassion creates space for vulnerability and authenticity, which then strengthens our connections.
Precisely. And that's what's so powerful about Brown's work. It's not just about individual happiness. It's about creating a more compassionate and connected world.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into Brené Brown's research on happiness. We covered so much, from vulnerability and authenticity to self-compassion and setting boundaries. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what it means to live a wholehearted life.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really incredible how all these concepts work together to create a framework for a life that's both meaningful and joyful.
It's given me a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to explore these ideas further.
If you're interested in learning more, I definitely recommend checking out Brené Brown's books or her TED Talks. Her work is truly transformative. It offers practical guidance for creating a life of courage, connection, and wholehearted living.
And remember, as Brown often says, vulnerability is not weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. So why not try a small act of vulnerability today? Share something real with someone you trust. You might be surprised at the connection you create.
And don't forget to be kind to yourself. You deserve it.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Brené Brown. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.